After surviving relegation and seemingly a united club, Evertonians just wanted a quiet season on and off the pitch. How wrong we were. This is the story of the 2022-23 season, the battle within. With Richarlison already sold and Everton unable to boost their striker options, news broke that Dominic Calvert-Lewin was injured ahead of the first game of the season against Chelsea.
I think we're probably looking at around 6 weeks for the injury. And I saw a lot of crazy rumours yesterday, but that's what it's been assessed over a couple of days and that's where we're at. So it comes with the territory of having a squad and training at this level, and we'll have to work around it, and other players will have to step up and do the job, and hopefully that 6 weeks passes relatively quickly and we get Dominic back.
As August progressed, with Calvert-Lewin getting injured right on the eve of the season, and the financial issues with the club became clear, but the recruitment, again, it was just a bit haphazard, it felt, even if some of the signings were good. It became more and more daunting, and more the realisation set in that we're going to have another tough season.
Before the season started, I think I was hoping that Everton wouldn't be anywhere near relegation trouble. Obviously, we just stayed up. It was a battle to stay up the previous season under Frank Lampard. We achieved it with a game to go, and I was hoping going into the new season that we wouldn't have the stresses that we'd have, and that we just stay up comfortably and we could start to build, moving higher up the table.
As the games in August ticked by, Everton only had 3 points. It was clear what they were missing.
I went to the Villa game and I thought we did okay, particularly sort of the last part of the game. I think it was the last 15, 20 minutes, and Arna seemed to come into the game and do particularly well. And we could have even pinched a point at Villa Park. Forest, I was a bit concerned after that game, I have to admit, because we were one down for a long time. I think Gray scored a pretty decent goal from memory, got us a point, but you're thinking, well, Forest are definitely going to be down there. And we didn't really dominate the game in any sense. Obviously, again, the result at Brentford quite positive. Chelsea, because it was the opening game of the season, everybody thought Chelsea were going to have a great season. We didn't necessarily see that as a bad result either.
I felt like the morale had started to drop off, and from maybe the fan base as well, and it was almost like that the reality was sinking in, and I think everybody perhaps hoped that things would be different, but I hadn't recovered from the Lampard season, so there was always that fear at the back of your head.
As the transfer window finally shut, Everton managed to get a centre forward when Neil Maupay came in from Brighton and Hove Albion. Was he the man to replace Richarlison?
At the end of the transfer window, Maupay had come in. We clearly needed goal-scoring strikers. He wasn't a proven goal scorer at Brighton, but there was such goodwill off the back end of the season, somehow, which in hindsight seems ridiculous because we escaped by the skin of our teeth. But there was a real feeling that there was a plan.
I thought it was appalling, right? Clearly, as a football club, we knew what we needed. We knew that Dominic had had a difficult time with injuries and we couldn't rely upon him, because we knew, what I felt at least, that if Dominic got injured and we didn't have goals in the team, then we would have a terrible season. So I've gone from it's going to be quite a difficult season to a very difficult season to a terrible season. And Maupay, for the life of me, I don't know what they were thinking there. I think that has to be something the manager at the time thought would work for him. And clearly he was not what we needed. He doesn't really have goals in him. And you know, and as the season played out, that was going to be exposed, wasn't it? And yeah, so I thought the dealing in the window, I wasn't too. Dwight McNeil, squad player, I thought. Maupay, I just did not get at all. I really didn't get it.
Everton finally got their first win of the season with a 1-0 victory over West Ham on the 18th of September. But with only 2 more wins till the World Cup break, Everton fans showed their displeasure at the team away at Bournemouth after a 4-1 defeat in the League Cup.
Couple of matches here in the next couple of weeks. Superstar Sunday the 20th of November. Tickets available for that one, and also Saturday the 26th of November. When we host Brighton in the Premier League Cup. We're going to have you back at Manchester Stadium for those.
We'd had a weird little run where we'd gone on an unbeaten run, lost a couple of games, looked okay, and then went into that final week and lost 3 games, including 2 hammerings at Bournemouth. And I know a lot of people were turning then and starting to think it was time to change the manager. There was a 6-week window, and it looked like if you were going to do it, that is the time to do it, get a new manager in and bed in. But because Everton had had a solidish start, and we knew that we needed attacking players, I sort of could understand why, at that time, the board were a little bit reluctant to make the change, even though, like I said, if you're going to do it, it would have been the perfect time to do it, given the 6-week break without Premier League games.
We need to change the manager. We were going to get relegated with Frank Lampard. So no, it wasn't the right decision. I think it was an easier decision for the board to make, because not sacking people is obviously less difficult than actually pulling the trigger. But we wasted, as a consequence, the whole duration of that, you know, shutdown, if you will, because of the World Cup. And we saw other clubs make changes and really benefit from them, and we didn't. And it's not hindsight, I don't think. I think many Everton fans, and I think I'm one of those, realised and thought, the longer that window went on, why haven't we done something? Why haven't we done it? He's a nice guy. He kept us up the season before. He enjoyed a big day against Palace, but he's totally lost.
He'd come into Goodison Park, the worst period I can remember. And, you know, I've seen some bad times at Everton over the years, but I've never seen it as toxic as after Benitez's reign. And I think any man who comes into a club and turns around the support base in the way Lampard was able to, and make that emotional attachment again with the support base, I thought he deserved a bit more time, a bit more credit. And also, I think inevitably you start to look at, you know, this rotation of managers that we've had over the past 7-8 years since Moshiri landed, and you think, well, this is just madness. You know, at some point we've got to stick. And I, again, fully expected that January we'd have had some money to spend. And Lampard, clearly because he'd been there at the club then nearly enough a year, would have known the sort of positions, the sort of players he wanted in. Again, this club is great for the rumour mill, but I was told that Maupay wasn't necessarily on his list of like 15 strikers to buy in the summer, so he'd not got his man in that regard. And there were 1 or 2 other positions I think he'd have been looking at as well. So despite the fact that I could understand and appreciate why supporters were saying after the 2 Bournemouth defeats, because we'd got beaten in the League Cup by them as well, my view at that time was still stick with him, because he's earned the right to try and prove himself once the World Cup finishes, and hopefully he can get a couple of players in and improve performances and results.
With the World Cup over and the transfer window about to open, it was clear Everton needed a plan heading into January.
We've got the January transfer window coming up, and obviously fans have been talking and talking about that we haven't scored enough goals and are expecting the club to maybe move for forward players. Is that kind of in your thinking as well, that we need more goals, and that might be an area you're looking to strengthen?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I said about the transfer policy stuff in the summer, my feeling was we need stability first.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't like the Bournemouth game the other night, because it felt like some games last year did. And I'm not just saying the nature of the goals, it was more the head down moment, because, oh yeah, we were doing all right in the game, they were 2-1, let's go, 3-1. You know, that sort of feeling was something to be addressed. So sometimes personnel will address it, because not only will it be maybe players that come in and do their job, but if there are other players now, the squad's more competitive in that area, well, then you better come in and do your job as well. Or, you know, these are the levels we're looking for. So I felt like generally we needed to look at the sort of the middle of the pitch from back through to front. The Dominic one's a hard one, because Dominic gets injured in 3 days before Chelsea. I know the window was still open. But then the other reality is that when we're sitting there with, you know, Kevin, the chairman, the owner, and we're talking about what we can do, you know, it's really easy to go, go and get strikers. You go, okay, what's the market? The striker market's the hardest. And we brought Neil Maupay in because he was a different player to Dom. Dom's your big nine. Neil's more of a between the lines man and then a box man. And I felt that was a compliment to have two, and I still think the same, but obviously Dom's had the injury problems. So will we look to have more and different options there? Yeah, without a doubt, because I think we all feel that at the minute, and I feel it as well, because now you've got 5 subs as well. Sometimes you want to impact again with something different, and we need that competition up there, because others have got it, and the reality is you win games in both boxes. So we're better now in our box. If you're not going to be better in that box, it's like Leicester, and this is not a dig at the lads that missed the chances, because I missed loads of chances. But if we scored it early, we're 1-0 up. Imagine Goodison. If we go back to 1-1 early in the second half, imagine Goodison, and it affects the game. For all the details in between, everyone will go, you could have done that, played him there and played 4-3-3 rather than like you go, if we're good in that box and we're good in that box, you know, the middle bit is massive, but that's the really important bit. So I think we've done well in that box. Can we do better in that box? The players that are here and what we can do to bring in, yeah, we can.
The plan should have been to go and get a centre forward. It is still beyond my comprehension that we left the January transfer window not only without a single signing, which, by the way, every other Premier League club made us at least one signing in January, but also without a forward player, when it was quite evident, you know, from prior to January, you know, from August, that we were so lacking in goals up front. It wasn't working for Neil Maupay. Dominic Calvert-Lewin's injuries were persistent. It was so evident we needed help up front. We needed goals. We needed creativity. And to come away from it without a centre forward, for me, was just, it was asking to have another horrifying, you know, nervous, anxious end to the season. And that ultimately is what we got.
Going into January, it felt like there was a real excitement amongst the fan base that we were going to make some signings. And I'm not talking about in the old Moneyball era when Mashiri first came in. And I remember having conversations with people on Twitter about, we've won the transfer window. And I was half tongue-in-cheek, but half of it was genuine, because we'd spent so long like with such a small transfer kitty. It felt like we were like, you know, mixing with the big boys. Of course, we were mixing with the big boys, but we were buying all the crap players, all the wrong players we couldn't use. When we come back after the start of the transfer window anyway, it felt like we've got to sign someone. We've got to sign a striker. We can't be relying on Dom. We just can't, unfortunately. Got to sign a striker. We've got to get some more creativity. The defence looked all right at times, probably, you know, passable. So every day, another day went past, and we were thinking, okay, who have we signed? Who have we signed? And I was just refreshing me phone all the time, and when it got to the last day of that transfer window, what a farce that was. I'm sure you could make some kind of like slapstick comedy around that moment in Everton's like boardroom. What's going on? And was there any conversations happening? I mean, maybe there was just, they'd all got off, they'd all gone home, and there was just no one there, and the phone was ringing, because there was nothing happening. And as it got close to midnight, I remember watching the Toffee TV coverage of that day, and just the sort of mood was fluctuating so dramatically from optimism, cautious optimism, but optimism nonetheless, to a slow realization that nothing was going to happen, nothing was going to change. And in a way, football's all about hope. And if you don't sign some players, even if they turn out to be not the best signings, you're at least giving the manager some options, and you're at least giving the fans some chance to have some semblance of hope. People say the hope that kills you. No, it's the lack of hope. And at the end of that transfer window, it felt like we were doomed.
Following the allegations, Everton lost 2-1 to Southampton, and the fans showed their displeasure with a sit-in protest.
Sack the ball, sack the ball, sack the ball! Sack the ball, sack the ball, sack the ball! Sack the ball, sack the ball!
On the day, I remember, obviously it was the Southampton game at home. It was a massive game. It was a huge game for Frank Lampard. Everton had come back after the break and had got an unlikely point at City, but had lost the other games, you know, particularly being battered at home by Brighton and going out the FA Cup. So that Southampton game was huge. It felt huge. And then on the way to the game, hearing the board weren't coming because for their own safety, and there was an allegation of what would have been a physical assault, a headlock. Frustration was there because you're looking, thinking, where's this come from? But we've got a huge game. We have to win this game. And the board almost seemed to be, or certainly the messaging appeared to be putting blame back on the supporters for what was going on, when there was frustration because Everton had the transfer window been open a couple of weeks and Everton had done no business, but it just seemed like an odd time to put this statement out an hour and a half before kickoff. And then so there was almost like a weird atmosphere and a weird feeling of disbelief because there was talk there was going to be a protest that day and everything else. So yeah, it was frustrating because obviously it seemed like it was a reaction to the fact there was going to be some protest, because there was a lot of people very, very, very frustrated and upset by the fact that we hadn't got an attacking player in, or at least one attacking player in. And this felt like very much a retaliation from Everton's board, putting all the blame onto the supporters, which wasn't the case.
First of all, I wasn't surprised in the slightest. And then I just thought how insulting to the fan base and to the club as in its heritage and what the club used to perhaps stand for. And I knew at that point there was probably no turning back for the board.
After 5 defeats in 6 games following the World Cup break, Frank Lampard was sacked after only coming in 12 months earlier.
Why now? You know, again, it's really quite close to the end of a window. It should have happened months earlier, but it released him from the torture he was going through. He didn't know what to do. The players were a bit all over the place as well. And the occasional performance suddenly coming out of the blue wasn't really useful, was it? So I think it was, thankfully, yeah. And maybe the one sentence thing is good he's gone, but is it too late?
First reaction, I was disappointed for the man because, as I say, I thought he'd done a decent job in his first few months at the club, and he did well to keep us up. And as I've already mentioned, I think that, you know, bringing the crowd and the players together at least was no mean achievement, really. I think he done well as far as that was concerned. So I was sad for him because I thought he was a genuine guy, and he obviously did love the club and wanted to succeed. And it's not always been like that with previous managers. I didn't shed a tear when Benitez got sacked, and certainly didn't when Allardyce was sacked either. So there was a little bit of that. But I think, again, you know, I've used the word before, but again, bewilderment, because if the plan was to give him some games, then the some games were before the World Cup break. Because if you can't improve your squad with bringing a better quality of player in, we already knew that Lampard couldn't take that team, that squad, to a level of performance that was going to make it possible for us to be comfortable as far as the division and finishing place was concerned. So, you know, bewilderment in terms of the way the directors had behaved. And again, you know, I don't know what the mindset of the players was before the West Ham game, but it seemed to me all the board turn up. You know, they can't go to Goodison Park, but they think it's safe to go to West Ham. Again, that's a bit strange. But as soon as you saw them all turn up, you think writing's on the wall for Lampard, and surely the players would have seen that as well. So that was a game that I think we potentially could have got a result out of, but it was lost before a ball was kicked because the players are looking up in the stands, looking at the directors, thinking, who's going to be the manager next week? Daft.
Welcome to Toffee TV. Sean Dyche has been announced as the new Everton manager. He's come in with a couple of days before the transfer window shuts to try and get some players in as well. And obviously we face Arsenal next week, first game to try and save Everton.
Initially, I was obviously, I was happy. Not happy because Lampard had lost his job, but happy that the change had been made because it needed to be made. Once again, in typical Everton fashion for me, it was months too late. You know, even if he wasn't going to be sacked after those Bournemouth games, you know, why he was kept in a job for the games post, you know, the World Cup break when we clearly, you know, weren't very good. Southampton, Wolves, etc. was beyond me. I think at the time I was relieved that there was the change and that we were now going to go and get another manager in and hopefully, you know, win some of those remaining games towards the end of the season, you know. But ultimately for me, again, I had a feeling of, is it too late? Is it a decision that should have been made earlier and we're going to ultimately pay for the fact that it wasn't made earlier?
So the transfer window shut and Everton hadn't signed a single player, even though they sold top goal scorer Anthony Gordon.
There you go. The window was shut. Everton have brought nobody in.
Shocking, isn't it?
And the last 18 games are massive now for the club.
And just like that, after not winning a game since October, Sean Dyche picked up 3 points in his first game against league leaders Arsenal.
You know what, we came out that Arsenal game, I was very confident going into it. I think we always do well at home to Arsenal in general. So I was confident that there'd be a reaction from the players to Sean Dyche, and B, just with that fixture. And they were so good. I think they'd only lost once coming to Goodison that day. It was a dinner time kick-off and everything. So it almost felt like it was a reset for us. And we played so well on the day as well. It wasn't a smash and grab. We absolutely deserved the victory. We deserved to win by more goals, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I think coming out the ground that day, there was a feeling of optimism. There was a feeling of, if it had been resignation before that, thinking, I don't see how we get out of this, there was a feeling of optimism. Even though the transfer window had closed and no attacking players had been brought in, you still come out that day. We'd got Dominic Calvert-Lewin back. You come out that day feeling like we've got a chance. We've got a chance.
In the following months, Everton's results were up and down, but a horrific 4-1 defeat against Newcastle at home and a 2-2 draw away to Leicester, which was seen as a must-win game, left Everton fans feeling like it was all too much heading to Brighton away. Little did they know that Everton was set to blow Brighton away, winning 5-1 at the Amex.
Brighton 1, Everton 5. That's right, Brighton 1, Everton 5. Unbelievable away victory for Everton. A shock victory. I asked the other day, could we get one of the those results where nobody sees it coming, and nobody saw this coming. Nobody saw this. My missus said 5-0 to Everton this morning. Yeah, in a mad prediction. There you go. Maybe she just knows more than I do, probably. But what a result for Sean Dyche's men on the South Coast. Before I start, I am made up, delighted for all of those Evertonians that have got up on a bloody wet bank holiday, gone all the way down to the South Coast, and have seen Everton's best performance of the season, probably best away performance for years. Just a tremendous away performance. I mean, I remember last season, down at the Amex, Everton were fantastic. They won 2-0. It should have been 5 that day. They destroyed Brighton on the counter, and they did it today, and it was incredible. They are a really good side, make no mistake about it. They're a team that definitely deserves European football. They've been brilliant this season. And to go there and to not only beat them, but to beat them in the way we have done is a sensational result for Everton.
I don't think I've ever felt as euphoric after a football match that I've not been at. Maybe ever. I mean, I can't. I was in London, so it was a weird day actually, because my wife and I had travelled down to London. So the first half, I was actually stuck on a train, and I was watching the result coming through, and the Everton alert came through after about 20 seconds, and my initial reaction was shit. They've scored already, thinking Brighton had gone 1 up. So to see Decore put us in front so early on was great. But then my second thought was, shit, we've scored too early, because we're never going to be able to hang on for 89 minutes. By the time we got to the hotel, I think it was 3-0. And then luckily they had the game up in the bar, so I just went and watched the remainder of the game. Well, that's a lie. I went and watched, we scored a 4th, and then Brighton scored a fluke. And even then, I think it was like 89 minutes and we were 4-1 up. I couldn't watch the end of the game because I thought, fucking, this is typical Everton, it's going to end up 4-4. But when the final whistle blew, and especially when McNeil, goes away and scores that worldie at the end, I was absolutely rocking and buzzing. And as I say, I don't think I've ever felt at the end of a game as relieved, as euphoric, as a game that I've not actually been physically at. And again, I think like most of us at that point, I thought, that's it, we're safe.
After a home defeat by Manchester City, Everton faced Wolves away at Molineux and knew they must get some kind of result to control their own fate on the final day against Bournemouth. It was a tense, nervous day for the Toffees, but in the 99th minute, Yerry Mina popped up to get a valuable equaliser and send Everton fans home rapturous.
So come on, get down to Goodison Park.
Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Nathan Patterson, what's the latest on the extent of their injuries, and will they be in the squad?
They won't be fit.
How big a blow is that to you?
Well, we haven't had Dom for probably 2/3 of my time here, so we've still won games, still got points on the board, and still performed. So that's the key to that one. And Pato's come in the side more laterally, done very well, but we lose him as well.
What about Mikalenko? Is he fit to come?
Yeah, he's a bit better, so we'll see how he reacts tomorrow to training today.
And certainly with Mikalenko and Nathan Patterson in mind, obviously the injury to Seamus Coleman and Vinagre as well, that causes a problem for you at fullback. I'm thinking in general terms that obviously impacts preparations greatly for you.
Yeah, but I've become used to that, since I got here, there was an imbalance in the squad, everyone knows that, and it's just unfortunate it's been tested to the limit by injuries, but that's part and parcel of the game.
So once again, it all come down to the final home game of the season. Everton controlled their own fate. They knew a win over Bournemouth would be enough to send Leeds and Leicester down. But that didn't stop the anxiety. And every Everton fan that day crossed every finger and every toe. Some of them prayed as well for a little bit of divine intervention.
So I managed to kind of put it from my mind on the Saturday. And I can't normally do that, but I did it pretty well. And then the Sunday morning I woke up and I felt sick. I can remember going on a run before the game and I actually felt physically ill. And it wasn't just because I was, hungover or anything like that. I actually felt physically ill and nervous.
I thought that we had enough to beat a team that, let's face it, had come with the flip-flop, or we thought would come with the flip-flop. So I think they put up a much harder fight than we'd anticipated.
Going into the Bournemouth game, the final game of the season, obviously we'd had the late equaliser at Wolves the week before from Yerry Mina, 99th minute equaliser, but there was still, even though you're delighted to get a point, and it was an important point, don't get me wrong, you were still looking at that thinking Wolves were safe. That was a big opportunity to win the game and take the pressure off. And obviously Leicester then go and get a very unlikely point at Newcastle, so it puts the pressure on that Bournemouth game. But I still felt going into it, we just had to do our job. We knew what we had to do. We had to win the game. Forget about what was going on elsewhere. If Everton win the game, we're safe. So going into the ground, you feel nervous, of course you do. There's a little sickly feeling in your stomach, but there was an incredible atmosphere. And it very much was, and I think everyone adopted this on the day. The fans were fantastic. Adopted this on the day of, we know what we have to do. We win the game, we are safe. Forget about other places. If the results go the way we need them to, be brilliant, but we need to do our job. And therefore, in the game, you know, we know that Leeds is a couple of goals down early on, so they're out the equation, but Leicester and West Ham is in the balance. And at half-time, Leicester are winning. Everton are down. Everton are relegated at half-time. But we knew one goal from us changes it. And the fans were brilliant. The fans stayed with it. The team come out. 45 minutes to keep yourself in the Premier, well, 55 as it happened, to keep yourself in the Premier League. Abdoulaye Doucouré scores a worldie. Can we hang on? And in general, I was fine until the fourth official put 10 minutes up on the board. And then I have to say it was the longest 10 minutes of my life.
The game itself is just a bit of a blur, to be honest. Like, I can't really pinpoint any key moments in it other than the Doucouré goal and then Pickford's save. Everything else is just, it was just nerves, and it wasn't even like the year before where we had the euphoria of coming back. It was, and then in that 5 minutes, you know, we'd come back and Palace just wanted to get off the pitch. This was like we scored in the 60th minute and then it's half an hour of hanging on. Even though Bournemouth in retrospect didn't do that much, you always had that feeling that we needed a second or that something had come back to bite us, and because you knew what was happening in the other games, you knew that if Bournemouth did get a late goal, that was it.
It was horrible. It was, even after the game, it didn't feel real, not in a sense of, oh, we've accomplished something massive, I can't believe it, just because I was so stressed, just because I was just so like emotional over it, just for, I think for a good hour.
That final whistle blows and I sank to my knees and I gave myself about 10 seconds of elation's the wrong word. It was more, I can't use another analogy other than it was like again escaping a burning building. You're not jumping around going, way, we got out. You're going, thank God for that. Thank God we've got out again. And 10 seconds later, I was down at my mother-in-law's and she'd made a Sunday roast And she kept shouting me through. She doesn't understand that football is a very important part of my life. And she shouted me through, and I'm like, I'll be in a minute. And at the 10 seconds after the final whistle, I just went, go and have me dinner. And I went and had me dinner and sort of forgot about it, really, because it was nothing to be celebrated, but very, very raw, visceral emotions. And again, if you want to look at the flip side, the positive, you can win all the trophies in the world. You can be treble winners as Man City. You can, you know, qualify in the top 4, get into the Champions League. And hopefully these things will happen for us down the line. But let's just appreciate the guttural, raw emotion of that last day escape.
Going into the final game of the season felt very different to the Lampard relegation battle. And I think this one in particular was nauseating and draining. And I felt nothing but relief and anger all at once at the end of it all. And just hopeful that things will be better, but total anger, yeah, at having it. The club had to experience it again, and the fan base.
It was anger, it was frustration, it was pure, you know, upset, and for me it was all about then making the changes, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, I was never going to be happy until those changes were made, and yeah, it was, again, I went straight home and just was frustrated all night because of the fact that we were even in that position in the first place.
The fact that the board had pissed us about so much and had let us down badly, particularly I think in the January transfer window. I think lots of things that the board did last season which you could question, but I think failing to strengthen the squad, even if it was just a couple of loan players, that's all we could have done. And of course, again, famously, the owner promised the fan advisory board guy, didn't he, that a striker was definitely going to be signed in January. So I think there was all those sort of negative thoughts going through my head. And again, as you walked away from Goodison Park after that post Bournemouth, you were thinking, well, yeah, that's great, but the owner's the same, the boards are the same. What's really going to change for next season?
The game's finished and you think, well, okay, let's use that phrase again, never again.